People of Earth, we have come to upgrade your cosmic consciousness. DNA activation ready. In 3, 2, 1.
Hi, welcome to Q&A on Breakthrough Leadership. I'm Lou Quinto.
And I'm Craig Anderson.
Craig, today we have another interview with another author, Croft Edwards.
Yes.
And Croft is the author of a book called Leadership Flow, Perfectly Square. And I guess the best way to describe it, it's almost like a Blanchard-like book where Croft tells a story and he weaves different leadership techniques and premises into it. And it's really, it's a quick read. It's only 98 pages long, but it was probably over the last year, probably I would put it in the top 10 books that I've read as far as quick, easy to implement information that I think every leader can work with. And so why don't we go ahead and introduce Croft Edwards.
All right.
Very good. Well, welcome Croft Edwards. How are you doing today?
I am great, Lou. It's great to see you.
Well, we're glad to have you become a guest here on Q&A on Breakthrough Leadership with Craig and I. We are quite interested in one, we want to know, just give you the opportunity to tell people what Croft and Company does. And then we want to launch into talking about your book and talk about leadership flow, Perfectly Square. So, but first, go ahead and give us your elevator pitch for our listeners.
Sure. We fundamentally help organizations become high performance organizations, lots of different methodologies, but ultimately it's how do you bring out the best in an organization through this thing that we all, the three of us and many others, I'm sure, are studying, which is leadership. How do you do that?
Right.
Okay. And so that's really what we do.
Okay. Craig?
Well, I was just going to ask, so as you look out to, without jumping too far ahead, you know, how are you seeing leadership evolve as you've been working with your customers over the last couple of years,
well,
especially through this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I, in some respects, I feel for many leaders because the world we're in now is so politically correct. And what do you do as a leader? And how do you say what you say? And whatever you say, somebody's going to have an assessment of. So it's very difficult time to be a leader, especially in the unknown, because I would make the assessment that the safe path is to pull back and play it safe. And my assessment is that's why we're having a lot of leadership challenges, is because leaders are afraid to say what they need to say because of fear of, oh gosh, I said something, somebody got offended, and now I spend all my time on my back heels.
Yeah,
great.
Well, not only leaders, Croft, but like you and I, speakers. I mean, you and I can be talking for 8 hours straight. And in 8 hours, the possibility of you saying something that will offend one person in the audience.
Yeah.
It's exponential.
I somehow got on YouTube last night, and there was Don Rickles doing roast of Ronald Reagan and Frank Sinatra.
Right.
And I was laughing, and everybody else was laughing, and he was making fun of everybody. And we've lost this ability to go, oh, what he said didn't destroy my life.
Right.
He's a comedian. He said it. And it was hilarious to see somebody like Ronald Reagan, who had just been the governor of California, and Rickles is just all over him. And Reagan's laughing with it. Like, I get it's a joke. So it is so interesting in this world we're in to just anything you say can and will be used against you. And you can have the greatest intent, but it'll just ruin your day.
Yeah. And in fact, it has been used against me. Just little things. Like one time I mentioned, my ex-wife, and in the evaluation, someone said, I can't believe that, he brought up his ex-wife and he put her down. And I didn't do that at all.
Yeah.
But I guess the phrase ex-wife just created these negative images in this person's mind. In fact, I complimented her and said that when we were married, she was the brains of the organization. But yet, because I used the term ex-wife, that this person just found it totally, I can't believe he said that, which, in a way, I'm glad that we're not speaking in public right now. But when things get back to normal, whatever normal may be, we're still going to have to put that editing equipment on probably tighter than we've ever had to.
Which will create, it's interesting, it's going to create a very interesting logjam for leaders, because being bold and saying, here's the direction we're going to go, won't be an option for most leaders, because what they're concerned about is, what will the board think? What will social media think? What will everybody think? And I think that's a huge issue with most leaders, because we've created a world where, one person is empowered to say, I was offended.
Right.
Well, okay, you were offended. It actually, were you offended, or what I said offensive? Because there's a big difference.
Yeah.
And if I say something that's truly offensive, my assessment is probably the whole group's going to be offended.
Yeah.
But just because I said this one thing and you're offended, that actually says more about you than it does about what I said. And now most leaders they're not willing to say that, because it's like, we have to be politically correct. So yeah, not a good, some respects, I enjoy what I do. And a lot of times I'll push people in one-on-one conversations, and I think, man, I would not want to be the leader of this organization trying to dance this dance.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's definitely, there's obstacles everywhere you look. So, and Craig, you and I have talked about it, and, we haven't done a head first into diversity and inclusion. But I think that's probably one of those root causes that are going to create some of the obstacles, Croft, that you're talking about.
Yeah. We want an inclusive voice, but not everybody gets to have a voice. Well, that's not really inclusive. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, well, we took a little bit of a tangent there, but appreciate your comments and thoughts on that. And hopefully it will be helpful also to our listeners. Let's talk about Perfectly Square.
Yeah.
First of all, Craig and I have had the opportunity to read it. It's in that Ken Blanchard style, if that's a compliment to you, where you tell a story, and within that story that really we get hooked, I got hooked, on poor Jackie and her situation in coming into, to the business that her brother was CEO because the father had a heart attack. And I was really emotionally caring for her and hoping that she would be successful. But in Perfectly Square, you bring up a few points. And the first point Craig and I want to get into is this concept of leadership flow. Croft, talk to us, help explain, what is leadership flow?
So a little backstory. So this, as I started really, what do I stand for? What do I think about as the leader? When I was doing my rebranding for my company, my branding partner, the great Emily Aiken, we were talking, and she talked about how I was a flow junkie, because I'm a marathoner. I am an avid woodworker, that kind of stuff. And I had never heard this term. This was about 10 years ago. And I started researching, and Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the researcher, flow states, or the state of ultimate being, and where we're at our best, performing at our best. And it just kind of dawned on me, is that not the goal of leadership, is to bring out the best of individuals and organizations? And it's fundamentally through tapping flow. Right. That innate, I love this is my passion. And so the way the book is, and kind of my look is then, how do we tap flow? And then as a leader, what are the behaviors which I can learn and practice to create flow? And so that's where the methodology kind of comes from. And it's that exploration of bringing out the best in yourself, your organization, and your team.
Okay, good. Craig, did you?
Yeah. So when you're thinking about it that way, that kind of, maybe I'm inferring from that it can represent a little different in all of us, how that flow works. So the slight differences, and lots of different ways to be an effective leader and communicator.
Well, and so Csikszentmihalyi ultimately, I think it was 70s, 80s, did a bunch of research on happiness, and they found this flow state kept getting referenced. And it's that place, we all know flow. It's the Saturday afternoon when you're doing something you love and you lose all track of time. You lose track of your bodily functions. And next thing you know, it's 3 hours later and you're going, oh my God, I've been so into this, right?
Right.
And so Csikszentmihalyi said, oh, this is a state. And then they started doing research on it and all this. Oh my gosh, the body's producing all these cool drugs that make us thrive and all that stuff. So really then it's about, how do we just tap that? And flow is that place where we all know, but as a leader, what may create flow in you may not do that for Luke. So how do I create an organization where you both can be at your best, both do what in a sense float your boat, what creates flow in you?
Cool. Interesting. Yeah. And one of the ways, I'm assuming, having read the book and everything, that you can determine flow within individuals in the organization as a leader is your concept of conversations.
Yeah.
Where the 3 conversations you outline in the book that Jim, Jackie's coach, talks about are effective conversations, ineffective conversations, and missing conversations. Peel that back for us.
Yeah. So what is the fundamental human technology? It's language.
Right.
And it's how we as humans coordinate action and language that determines what's possible. So we look at that idea, and I'm not claiming to invent this. I'm very much part of a discipline and a discourse that studies this. But if you look at language, we can start to see the conversational acts that are happening to create an organization. Because think about it. We don't just randomly have 30 people show up to a building on a Tuesday morning and start making widgets. No, there's conversations that everybody had to get to that place. And what I love about conversations then is the idea of peeling it back, you can start to observe what are the conversational phenomenon.
Right.
Right. There's research on what are called the speech acts. We all are in conversation. There's fundamentally only 6 speech acts that we can break down and go, oh, it's one of these 6 things. And then they combine to make a conversation. And then the idea, if we're seeing the results we want, we have to have had effective conversations.
Right.
So if, for instance, you're building a house and here it is the day you take ownership of the house, you get the keys from the builder, there had to be effective conversations to build that house.
Right.
Because what is a blueprint? It's a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Then the phenomenon of ineffective conversations is that we're having conversations, but we're not getting the output or the end state that we're desiring. And then missing conversations are either we know about them, or we're just not either brave enough, or we're choosing not to have them, or we're blind to the need for conversations.
Right.
So I could have made somebody upset. I don't know. I haven't seen them for a month. There's a missing conversation, but I don't even know it's missing.
See, and you bring that up in the book with Jackie and her brother Mark.
Yeah.
Where, and not to be a spoiler alert here, but Jackie knows that Mark does not want to be CEO of the company. Yeah. He's got other passions. And it isn't until Jim, Jackie's coach, says that's a missing conversation. Yeah. You need to have that conversation with him. And I found out of the 3 conversations, the most important one was the missing conversation from a leadership aspect, because sometimes we want to avoid conflict. And in my opinion, you correct me if I'm wrong, you wrote the book, but missing conversations, I would say, stems primarily from that conflict avoidance.
That, and just in the sense of lack of leadership, because how often do we see something, and in the book, I talk about broken chairs and dusty corners, right? So if I go into an organization, and I learned that actually from one of my clients, I would go and there was all these chairs sitting around and nobody would throw them away. And then it was kind of like, oh, wait a second, there's missing conversations. There, either at the best, there was ineffective conversation. Somebody said, get rid of that chair. So the person stuck it in the hallway. But really there was missing conversations about what are our standards? What do we care about? And so with Jackie in the book, she's fundamentally saying to her brother eventually is, look, we've got to have a conversation that may not be comfortable, but in many respects, we're already having it.
Right.
We're just not having it with one another.
Right.
And so that conflict avoidance, to your point, Lou, is very, very common. One of my teachers, I love this term. He uses the term cordial hypocrisy. And so cordial hypocrisy is, Lou, you and I, there's a conversation. We both know it needs to be said, and we're having it with ourselves, but we sit there in meetings and we smile and we're, oh yeah. How you doing, Lou? You know, blah, blah, blah.
And sounds like Congress.
Yeah. Right. It is, because if we just actually have the conversation,
my good friend from Texas, I want to know.
What if we actually said this ignorant whatever that I don't like?
Right.
The good news is now we can actually have a conversation.
Yeah.
Because why don't I trust you? Why don't I like you? Why aren't Mark and Jackie having that conversation? Mm-hmm. And that's a skill that can be learned, that can be practiced. So I tell people when I go into organizations, I'm fundamentally just observing conversations. Okay. Because I can go sit in a meeting room it's the Tuesday afternoon meeting, and I may be in the back room acting like I'm not paying attention, but actually what I'm doing is listening for the conversations that are had effectively, ineffectively, or are missing, because now I can start to see, oh, the leader thought they were making a good request. And you've seen this, somebody needs to fix that. And every person around the table is thinking, I'm not somebody. So the leader is going forth thinking, here's the future I'm going to see. And everybody else in the meeting is going, man, I'm glad I don't have to do that.
Right.
So that's an ineffective conversation. And then missing conversation, a lot of times, one of the challenges with them is we're just blind to the phenomenon.
Yeah.
We can't see it because we can't see what we can't see.
Right.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I've noticed a lot that somebody actually, coach I had told me that you're really carrying the weight of the conversation all on you if you're not ready to have it with the other person. So all that kind of burden of carrying whatever this ill feeling is or this unresolved issue, you're carrying it all until you're willing to have that conversation with the other person. Yeah. And then it starts to build the resentment because now you're resenting them because you haven't had the conversation. And it's just a fascinating phenomenon. And I always have observed, either coming in as a new leader in an organization or as a consultant into an organization, people will unburden that stuff to you, a perfect stranger.
Yeah.
But they won't go have that conversation. Yeah. So,
well, like in that example, we look at the idea of a request. So, what is a complaint? Well, a complaint is actually just a very ineffective request. So, Craig, I'm going to complain to you about Lou, but actually the person I need to be making the request to is Lou. I'm saying, Lou, here's the future I want to see. And we're all guilty. I'm guilty of it all the time. And it's that challenge as a leader to go, wait a second, I actually have an option here. It's a request. It's a conversation with that person. But to your point, I have to be bold enough to say, let's go have a different conversation. And the other person, just because I have the skill doesn't mean the other person's ready for that conversation yet.
Right.
So we have to grant them the grace and the ability to say, oh, I want to have a conversation, but just because I want to have the conversation doesn't mean they have to have that conversation.
Wow. Croft, if leadership doesn't work out, marriage counseling sounds like an avenue you can go down.
All bets are off in marriage conversation.
I think there's a lot of missing conversations, some failed marriages, having been there twice myself. But one of the other things you said with conversations too, and you mentioned this in the book that I thought was good, was moods and emotions are predisposition to action.
Yeah.
Flesh that out.
Moods and emotions are a conversation, right? So if I show up to you, and if you're listening to this on audio, you can't see it, but if I have this face that says, Lou, we're going to talk, the mood's already having a conversation, right? But as human beings, we're always in moods and emotions. We cannot be. We're emotional beings. And most organizations, moods and emotions are taboo unless they're the good ones, right?
Yeah.
But moods and emotions are that predisposition to action. So that's where what's fun for me is, as a coach, I can start to observe, oh, what mood is this conversation in?
Right.
And what mood it's in is going to limit what the potential outcomes are. Another one of my teachers makes a statement, the right conversation in the wrong mood is the wrong conversation. So I show up, I want to have a conversation about X, but my mood's already putting you on the defensive. So it's probably not going to be an effective conversation. Best case, it's ineffective. Or my mood causes me to just avoid it. So now it's a missing conversation.
Right. Wow. Love it. That's great. Yeah. Talk to us here as we start to wind down. The model that Jim, in a good coaching way, over a period of meetings, builds for Jackie. And, it has the creating culture and expanding capacity. It's visioning the future, cultivating other leaders and teams. And finally, in the middle of that model is self-mastery. So where does that come from? How did you develop that?
So back to, again, when I was kind of rebranding the company and getting clear on what I stand for, I started thinking about, there was fundamentally 4 statements I always made, or almost always made, in an organization. And the first was, the culture you have is 100% perfect to get the results you're currently getting. So if you don't want to change in your results, just keep doing what you're doing.
Right.
And then that led to creating culture and expanding capacity. Because if we want to develop an organization that's going to do great things, we have to have a culture that supports it, and we have to have the capacity to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So then the second statement I would say is something effective. The two most critical jobs of a leader are, one, creating a future that others see themselves in and they're motivated to then join and be a part of. So that became visioning the future and cultivating other leaders and teams, because as a leader, I've got this vision of the future. Now I have to get other people on board, and they have to be committed to that future.
Right. And I think in the book, one of the employees, Jacob, the manager,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't buy into the vision. And eventually that's his route. I'm out of here.
Yeah. So if I'm not committed to that shared future, then we're not going to likely have the high performing organization. But at its core, the other statement I always said, the most difficult person you ever have to lead is yourself. Mm-hmm. And that's where self-mastery comes from, because my issue is fundamentally Croft.
Right.
I get in my own way. So Lou, to your point about conversations, I know I need to have the conversation with person X, but I go, yeah, but I don't want to because it's too much work. So is the other person the issue, or am I actually the issue? Because I make the assessment that I'm the issue. I get in my own way. And then we get into, so what makes up the self? And I actually, sometimes we'll spell it S-E-P, L-H, there we go. So what is the self? So the S stands for somatics, where we all have bodies, but the body isn't just, we're not brains on a stick. The body's a domain of action. And anytime I take action, I'm in my body. I'm typing an email, I'm talking. And there's far much deeper than that, obviously. The E is emotions, moods and emotions. We're emotional beings. Well, guess where moods and emotions live? They live in the body. L stands for language. Obviously, we talked about that. The P stands for practices. We are our practices. And so whatever we practice, we get good at. So if I'm good at having effective conversations, I had to have practiced it.
Right.
And then the H stands for our historical discourse, because we all have our histories. You can't change our history, but we can start to be aware of, oh, I see the world as I see it based on my history, not how the world actually is. It's just based on the observer I am. So then we look at the shifts come through all of these things. As a coach, I do a lot of coaching in the body. So if, for instance, if you're in a mood of resignation, shoulders down, head slumped, there's a sigh in the voice, right? There's a story that goes on with that in language, a rational excuse of why things can't change. Like resignation, you know what the behavioral predisposition of resignation is? To not take action.
Okay.
So why even bother? Because we tried this before. So then it's all of those things. And the idea is that the more I can start to kind of be aware of this and then manage myself, manage my flow, start to manage my team's flow, now I can start to create a higher performing organization.
Great. Yeah, it really comes down to, and it's the hardest thing sometimes, is just a lot of self-awareness as a leader.
Yeah.
And that's almost the first piece for you to be an effective leader. And that's what I work with a lot of my clients too, is how well do you know yourself? So you know what these things are coming out of as you're acting out with people. And that sounds a big piece of what you're doing with your clients.
Yeah, we'll come in full circle to when we were talking about, how difficult it is to be a leader right now. I assess that one of the big breakdowns, a lot of leaders go, oh gosh, I don't know if I should say this. Because there's an assessment that, oh, what if I say this? People are going to say things, I'm going to be unpopular. And leadership is the ability to say, no, I'm going to say some things that you may not like to hear. And if you get triggered by them, well, let's have a conversation about that. But let's have a bigger conversation. Because we're not going to get, to Einstein's quote, we're not going to solve today's issues with the current level of thinking that created them. We're going to have far bigger conversations. And for instance, one of the conversations is who should be in the conversation.
Right.
Just because I scream the loudest in social media doesn't mean I should necessarily be the leading voice for this subject.
Yeah.
Because I may not be qualified to have this conversation. I may have a life history that says, well, okay, that's your story. But let's actually have a conversation with the people that can have the conversation, who are at a place where they truly can listen. There's a study of this called spiral dynamics. And one of the terms I love from that is include and transcend. So how do we include others and our conversation transcends the current conversation.
Yeah. In fact, going back to what you just said, we've all been in those meetings where somebody gets up on their soapbox regularly and shuts other people down because people's eyes roll and that they don't have the experience, they don't have the knowledge. But as you go back to the social media, they've got the loudest voice.
Yeah.
And so therefore, I think that could cause for a lot of those missing conversations because people have just shut down. They're like, they're just going to listen. He's going to take up all of the air in the room.
Yep.
And I'm just going to sit here and be sociably lazy, as we refer to it. Is I'm here, and as you use the term, I'm a brain on a stick. That's all
I'm just going to show up. There's where the cordial hypocrisy comes in. I just sit there. We're all having this conversation. This person is dominating. We know that, but a leader doesn't say, you know what? You've had your say. It's time for other people to be in the conversation. And that's difficult to do because today's leaders, a lot of them are saying, oh, well, I don't want to offend anybody.
Yeah.
So yeah, very difficult to do.
Absolutely. No question about that. So Craig, I got a new nickname for you. Brain on a stick.
Great. It's better than the old ones.
Yeah.
which aren't made for public consumption. So we'll skip by those. So Croft, what we like to do at the end is we like to just do some key takeaways from the time we spent back, on our talk here. So I'm going to kick it to Craig first. And Craig, based on what Croft's talked about, when we talk about, leadership flow, when we talk about conversations and emotions being a part of that also, and then the model that he presented, what are your key takeaways?
Well, one, I loved the phrase, and I won't get it right, but this idea you talked about that our production is 100% a result of the culture that we have, because I just love that idea, because culture is so important and everybody has one. It may just not be the one you want, right? And it's certainly turning into results. So I love that concept. Overall, though, what I really love is this idea of the effective, ineffective, and missing conversations, because that was a huge struggle for me as a leader. I grew up learning to be a people pleaser. And so those difficult conversations were dramatically difficult for me growing up as a leader in an organization. And until I could get past that, I couldn't be the leader that I was fully capable of. So I love that idea of training people on how to really have the right conversation.
Yeah, I was going to say conversations would be at the top of my key takeaway, but I like the moods and emotion that are the preposition for action. Because you can go into a conversation, and Croft, you said it best, where I come in, I want to get something done, and I'm talking to you about it, and you can tell that I'm adamant and I'm frustrated, and all of a sudden you become defensive. And therefore that communication closes down on your end because you're just going to listen to me, vent, dump my bucket, whatever it may be. And I think, in the book, you use an example where Jackie was actually able to identify the difference of her emotion from one meeting and the results she got from that one meeting into the second meeting, where it was much more productive because she went into it with a better mood and a better emotion to what the final outcome was going to be. And it created a great conversation between her and one of the employees. And so I like it's not just words, it's the emotion and the mood of the situation. So, well, Croft, what's your key takeaway from your time with us on Q&A on breakthrough leadership?
Well, Lou, I would add and take what you guys were talking about, that idea. I make the statement that high-performing organizations are very good at having conversations about how they have conversations. So they're aware of the phenomenon, and they say, you know what, we've got to get really good at having the conversations, which requires practice.
Yeah.
And so it's a culture thing, because it isn't just, oh, we're going to go do a weekend class and now we know how to have conversations. No, you got to practice it. And the people that have to practice it the most are the leaders. I can't tell you how many times I've been brought in by a leader to fix so-and-so. We got to start with you, because if so-and-so's broken, it means you haven't had effective conversations with them.
Right.
And that's where I usually start. So, and plus, thank you guys so much for this opportunity. Love being in the conversation.
Absolutely.
Sure, no problem. Yeah, no, we appreciate you coming on and spending some time. For our listeners and viewers, if people want to get in touch with you, Croft, how can they do so?
Well, the good news about having the name Croft is there's not a lot of us. So if you Google Croft Edwards on like the first 10 pages, which isn't a great thing because it's, you know, if you just randomly pick 2 words, they would be, you know, up there. But you can find me at croftandcompany.com, at Croft Edwards on social media, on LinkedIn. Just look me up, Croft Edwards. Always open for a conversation, and hopefully we'll have some conversations from this.
Sure. Any new books on the horizon?
I've got 2 that I'm working on.
Good.
So the second one is a follow-up to this. It's Leadership Flow. The working title is called The Longwall Move. It's based in a coal mine in Alabama, it's loosely based on an actual mine that I worked at, did consulting with. There was 2 mines, but they were connected underground, so technically they were one mine.
Right.
One side of the mine had a benevolent dictator. The other side had a jerk for the mine manager, and you could see the difference between the 2 mines. So it's about what's called the conversation for action.
Right.
And the 4 basic moods, which is a model which looks at resignation, resentment, ambition, and acceptance.
Yeah. See,
so that, what's that?
You brought up longwall mining, and the minute you said that, I mean, my ears perked up because several years ago, I worked with a coal mining company in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. Awesome. And I spent a day in the mine and had to walk all the way to the longwall. Yeah. And that is a unique life. And leadership is so important in a coal mine because some of these guys, they didn't see daylight for like 6 or 7 months because they'd go down before sunrise and they'd come up after sunrise. And when they're down there, they're in their own environment. And leadership is so important in there. I look forward to reading that.
Yeah, it was fun. I got to spend actually almost 3 years working at that mine.
Wow.
And I almost had enough time underground. I needed a couple more months that I was going to sit to get my papers as an underground supervisor.
Wow.
Be certified. So, and then the second book I'm writing is on coaching in the body, which is from a somatic perspective. How do you actually do it and where do you start? So,
right.
Great. So those will be coming out as soon as I can. The writing's coming. It's coming along.
Excellent. Good. Well, best of luck. Again, thanks for joining us on Q&A on Breakthrough Leadership. And again, be sure to go out there and get Perfectly Square, which can be purchased on Amazon. So, Croft, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Croft.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you later.
All right. Bye-bye.
Lou, that was a great interview with Croft. I picked up a lot of great tips on communication and leadership. Yeah, definitely. I had the opportunity to work with Croft on the speaking circuit, and I can say that he always gets a good reception from his audiences. So I was glad to be able to bring him on to talk about his book. And now I want a fish tank. So there's that. What do we got coming up next week, Lou? Next week, we are going to be talking to Glenn Pash, who is the CEO of PCG Digital. And what we're going to talk to Glenn about is we're going to talk about the essentials for leadership training in the future. So it should be a good interview. Sounds good. We could learn how to be leaders finally. It'll be fantastic for us. So thanks everybody for watching this episode of Q&A on Breakthrough Leadership. You can find all our episodes on QAleadership.com. You can also find us on Facebook and LinkedIn, subscribe to us on YouTube, and also find us on all your favorite podcasting platforms. So until next time, I'm Craig Anderson. And keep your hands washed. Keep your distance. I'm Lou Quinto.